The idea of a zombie apocalypse has long fascinated humans, with countless books, shows, and movies exploring the concept in different ways. The likely first of these recorded zombie stories was published in 1929, known as The Magic Island. But the basis of the book was voodoo cults in Haiti, who have been passing down stories of zombies since ancient times. Yet through all of these adaptations and different explorations of the zombie idea, as a biologist, I've always noticed one thing missing. See, it's a common trope in zombie films to have a half-dead deer approach the characters, so they can debate if eating it is safe or not, and explore the details of the disease in that show's universe. Aside from that though, the only animals I've seen make on-screen appearances in zombie shows are fish caught during fishing scenes, and the birds that chirp during peaceful scenes. But would these fish and birds even be around in an apocalypse? And what other animals would dominate or disappear? Let's talk about the speculative evolution of a zombie apocalypse. First, we should get out of the way the somewhat obvious conclusions. Animals that have benefited greatly from humans would likely see a mass decline when lots of humans died off. Birds like pigeons, starlings, house sparrows, and seagulls, which dominate many cityscapes and can rely primarily on human food waste to survive, would struggle once there was less food being produced and wasted. Another example are rats, who have benefited probably more than any other animal in the world from humans connecting and building cities. They are perfectly adapted to weave between the little gaps we leave for them and collect anything edible. Interestingly though, I don't think the population graph of these animals would be straight down. When humans first start zombifying and the world collapses, they'll leave tons of infrastructure in disarray. Every restaurant in the world will be unguarded, and every trash bag unchanged. This is especially true of rats, who, assuming they can't get infected with the zombie disease themselves, would have the greatest food source in rat history, when a majority of the human population dropped dead. For this reason, I think the population graph would look something like this for these animals, with a sharp increase right after the zombie disease hits, then a huge crash as humans no longer produce waste for them to consume. Another interesting bird to talk about in an apocalypse are raptors. Some of you may know that falcons and hawks often like to dive onto prey from above, and so they'll sit up in trees on the mild side and at the top of cliffs on the wild side. They're not opposed to using human structures to do so though. I can attest to this myself as someone who has visited the local quarry and seen falcons and various other raptors taking up the airspace above the quarry. I'm not alone in this observation either. Some raptors, such as the Cooper's hawk, are known to have adapted to city life, using tall buildings as perching points. The main issue these birds face in the modern day in these cities is humans. Cars, buses, planes, wires, and more are all unforeseen obstacles that can take this cool adaptation and make it a death sentence. However, most of these activities would cease in a zombie apocalypse, meaning raptors would be left with an abandoned city of tall buildings to perch on, few obstacles, and like we discussed earlier, a booming population of the pigeons and rats that they like to hunt. As their prey declined, the raptors likely would too, but for a short time, we might see the most successful birds of prey in history. Some very interesting animals to monitor during a zombie apocalypse would be recent invasive species, which humans are currently keeping under control. This is actually more common than you probably realize. Billions of dollars worldwide are spent annually trying to keep invasive species at bay. One incredibly large-scale example that I've talked about on this channel multiple times before are Asian carp in the USA, who are currently being held back from destroying the Great Lakes by a giant electrical barrier, owned and operated by the US military. It's safe to say that when everyone is hungry for brains, the army would probably abandon this post, and it's only a matter of time until a malfunction releases the Asian carp into the Great Lakes, devastating all of the native fishes. Of course, invasive species tend to balance out over time, as they overconsume their food source then have mass die-offs. However, in the meantime, they would likely cause the extinction of dozens of native fish species. And the large-scale eradication of small fishes and native minnows by large carp would have a lot of adverse effects. There are many animals totally reliant on small fish as their primary or only food source, such as herons, kingfishers, some raptors, water snakes, fishing spiders, and many more. With carp releasing into the Great Lakes and devastating the small fishes, all of these animals would suffer a huge decline in their food sources as well. Now I know what you might be thinking, AVNJ, why are you only talking about all of the species being hurt long term? Wouldn't some species use the open space from humans to recover? And I hear you, so let's discuss a few of those. What I'm talking about here are mainly species that are currently threatened by human activity. Whether it be habitat loss, pollution, or them being directly hunted, more than 44,000 species are currently listed as threatened with extinction. Many of these animals could make a comeback if their habitat stopped being removed, such as snakes, amphibians, and primates native to the Amazon rainforest, which is currently being logged by humans at a rate that is hurting those animals. An interesting point, though, is that pollution doesn't stop when humans stop. In fact, probably the worst pollutants and contaminants are currently being held back only by human engineering. Waste treatment plants, nuclear facilities, biological laboratories, landfills, and many more such infrastructures would degrade and release into the environment without human upkeep. And although it's hard to pinpoint and measure the effects of such an occurrence, I think it's safe to say that most animals threatened with extinction from water pollution, such as amphibians, aquatic reptiles, and fishes, would face a grave threat of extinction. A local example that I can think of is the pygmy sculpin. This fish is only in one little creek in Alabama, and on that creek there is an active waste treatment plant. As someone who's been there, I can tell you it not only interrupts the flow of the stream, but smells terrible, and the water surrounding it is growing tons of algae, and thus likely choking out the oxygen from fishes in the water. If this plant were to be sent into disarray when a zombie apocalypse took over, it would probably leak into the stream, devastating prey and predator alike, and causing the extinction of the pygmy sculpin. And yet, this is only one small example of how human-contained pollution could cause worldwide extinctions when facilities shut down. A somewhat obvious success story, though, could be vultures. They don't really face risk of predation and just need unattended decaying animals to eat, which it's safe to say when the world became zombified seems like it would be commonplace, at least for a bit, long enough for a population boom amongst all vulture species. One potential long-term success story, in my opinion, though, are the large fauna of African ecosystems. Elephants, giraffes, rhinoceroses, lions, tigers, and cheetahs are all primarily threatened right now by humans. Humans build cities, reducing the potential territory and landscape for these animals, and they hunt the animals. Whether to take a particular resource from them or not has been a long-prized activity. While some hunting might still be performed in an apocalyptic scenario as, say, a means to find food, I think that long-term these animals' ecosystems could recover slowly, allowing all of the mammals to do the same. Sometimes, what a species needs most is just for humans to leave them totally alone. However, some species need the exact opposite. A good number of species live only in captivity, being totally extinct in the wild. These animals are wholly and unequivocally reliant on humans to keep them alive. Many of these animals have been the subject of extensive reintroduction and wild breeding projects to no success. Species such as the Hawaiian crow, Spix macaw, Yangtze sturgeon, chicken frogs, and many more would be totally gone almost the same instant that humans were gone and could not take care of them anymore. One creature that is more reliant on a functioning human society than you might realize are bedbugs. While not all species of bedbug have adapted to live in homes and feed on people, many species have either totally committed to this strategy or at least partially done so. Bedbugs can transfer between wild animals and pets, but without the human host at the end of the line, it's safe to say that in a zombie apocalypse, bedbugs would struggle greatly to reach their end goal of reproducing. And you might think in the same vein then that something like ticks would also struggle without humans, but interestingly, I think ticks would do even better without many human hosts to attach to. People don't realize this, and please don't take this as a reason to be sympathetic towards ticks because they are truly terrible creatures, but ticks don't want to bite humans. We are what's called a dead-end host for them. We often notice them, remove them, and kill them, and even if we don't, when they drop off us after feeding, they're likely in a house or building, where finding the conditions they need to reproduce is near impossible. Ticks typically prefer to go through a series of hosts in their lives, from small to medium to large, but humans are not among these preferences, and are just a result of wrong place, wrong time, and a case of mistaken identity. Without this fairly common mix-up, ticks would attach to the host they evolved with, such as mice and deer, and continue their life cycle as they want to, likely leading to more success. One human parasite who would absolutely not be better off, though, are the human head louse, Pediculus humanus, who have co-evolved with humans and are not known to use any other animal as a host. While there may be some value in a zombified human as a host, zombies don't tend to be long-lived in TV shows and films, so without a quick mutation and adaptation, the human head louse would most likely go extinct within a few years of the zombie apocalypse. Similarly, Demodex folliculorum is a microscopic species of mite that can only live on the skin of humans. They don't typically cause any harm and are on almost every human in the world, but they are totally reliant on us for survival, and without an abundance of hosts, would also go extinct. I'd be hard-pressed not to talk about plants at least a little bit. We are by far and away the biggest threat that plants have. We uproot them, we pollute their soils, we introduce native species that choke them out of the ecosystem that they evolved within, and many, many, many more threats. The unfortunate reality is that thousands, if not tens of thousands of invasive plants are already dominating ecosystems that they don't belong in. And although the introduction of new invasives could probably stop when humans become zombies, these old invasives will need to live out their dominance in the environment, letting nature find an equilibrium with time, but similarly to the Asian carp, taking down a lot of species with them along the way. An interesting but somewhat sad reality is that many of the animals reliant on us are domesticated, and when we zombify, will be on their own. Billions of cats, dogs, chickens, cows, horses, pigs, and many more animals would be left ownerless. In the case of outdoor cats, there's a chance they could learn to survive, and dogs might even have a chance too. Cows, however, especially dairy cows, would likely die from lack of servicing. Domesticated pigs and horses would be trapped in their enclosures without any instinct for wild survival. Even if they didn't starve from learned incompetence, what might get them is the rise of my next focus animal, the land predators. It might be no surprise to you that animals like wolves have had their populations annihilated entirely through direct and indirect conflict with humans. Many species were threatened with extinction due to hunting by farmers who wanted to protect their livestock from these wolves. Humans even once removed them from national wildlife areas as they were seen as a nuisance. It's safe to say our presence does not typically benefit wolves at all. Now imagine a zombie virus or fungi or whatever disease has gone around. Most humans are dead or wandering the streets for brains. Their livestock, unprotected, stupid, and helpless. Coyotes, wolves, foxes, any animal with the guts to adapt and target these animals would see endless food and success for some time after humans began to disappear. Long term, of course, nature would need to balance, as it always does, and without people propagating these farm animals, they would die off and leave a lack of food for a grown predator population. One interesting little side note that I recently read about are silkworms. Through extensive domestication for their uses in making silk products, they have an extremely bad case of learned helplessness, and apparently can no longer even find their target plant that they need to eat on their own, without being directly placed on it by a human. When humans are too busy surviving to produce this silk, these silkworms would probably also go extinct. All of what I've discussed so far have been pretty short-term effects of a zombie apocalypse, but it might be interesting to zoom out and think long-term as well. One interesting topic is the role of cities in future ecosystems once humans are gone. Undoubtedly, cities would fall apart and be overrun by plants, as we often see in futuristic TV shows. But an interesting question and debate that some are having is whether these overgrown cities would represent a new type of ecosystem or would adapt the qualities of the ecosystems around them. For example, if New York City becomes abandoned, within a few decades, it'll likely be taken over completely by plants and common small animals. It could also be a heavenscape for small birds, but would the city develop its own unique attributes and draws for these animals, or would the surrounding wilderness simply claim the city slowly? I am of the opinion that towns and cities represent entirely unique and new ecosystems. Buildings, windows, streets, facilities, and more all present unique advantages and challenges to the organisms living in them, and it's possible that in a distant future, reclaimed city could be a biome, just like a savanna, a plains, or a forest. New species could evolve specifically adapted to these new ecosystems and create a really cool future environment where humans once dominated. These are my thoughts on a zombie apocalypse and its effects on animals worldwide. If there's any animals you think would succeed or fail in a significant way, feel free to leave a comment. There definitely seems to be a draw to the idea of a post-human world, as it's a frequently discussed topic, and putting more information out there on how animals would survive in that situation is a really cool idea. Thanks for watching.